What I would like to do this afternoon is talk a bit about sanctions and engagement in theory and in practice as applied to the North Korean state case, motivated by that country's nuclear weapons and missile programs. The conclusions are straightforward. Due to its internal political economy, North Korea is remarkably insensitive to either sanctions or inducements, while the outside world has limited influence on the policies that Pyongyang pursues. To the extent that outside actors can affect outcomes, South Korea is key. And due to recent political changes, both here in Washington and in Seoul, tail risks, both positive and negative, are rising. But the nature of the target state is relevant as well. Authoritarian states, of which North Korea is an extreme example, can frustrate sanctions either by repressing the domestic political discontent associated with the imposition of sanctions, and by channeling sanctions-related rents to key constituencies and supporters. In the case of North Korea, it's under both UN and bilateral sanctions. The UN sanctions are mostly what I would call defensive in nature, seeking to disrupt North Korean military programs. In addition, there are limited luxury goods sanctions aimed at punishing the elite. But these sanctions have been, at least the luxury goods sanctions, have been ineffective, as shown in that chart, which applies luxury good sanctions lists of Japan and Australia to Chinese customs data. And as you can see, Chinese exports of luxury goods, as defined by these other third countries, have been rising steadily despite various UN Security Council resolutions. The bottom line is that marketization and opening from a North Korean standpoint may complicate governance, but it is not necessarily politically destabilizing, and indeed it actually may generate resources that reinforce state power. In particular, North Korea has revived the doctrine of Byungjin Line, which is parallel movements across two tracks, in this case the development of nuclear weapons and the development of the economy. And this is really critical because this doctrine posits a complementarity, not a conflict, between nuclear weapons and economic development. And in particular, it does not signal that economic reform implies a moderation of external behavior, but rather it signals a continuation of external tensions. And honestly, if you remember anything from today's talk, remember this slide. It's the most important thing I'm going to show you. A few years ago, Kim Jong-un, leader of North Korea, faced an interesting choice. The fellow in the red scarf here on the left-hand panel, that's Eric Schmidt, the chair of Google, one of the world's most dynamic and innovative companies. When Schmidt came to Pyongyang, Kim did not have time to meet with him. Instead, he sent him to what appears to be a unheated room to watch a North Korean soldier who appears to be dressed in a quilted jacket type at a keyboard. Yet, 6 times, Kim found days on his schedule to confer with the noted American diplomat Dennis Rodman. That simple choice, given the opportunity to confer with Eric Schmidt or given the opportunity to party with Dennis Rodman, and that choice reveals something about Kim's values, priorities, and quite frankly to me, his suitability for leadership. And as much as the complexities of the economic and diplomatic relations addressed in the book, this choice is suggestive of how decision-making in authoritarian regimes is subject not only to the institutional and economic constraints that we elaborate, but to the discretion and even, frankly, the whim of its leadership. So where does that lead us? North Korea is their paradigmatic hard target. It is insensitive to either sanctions or engagement. The outside world should have modest expectations about our ability to influence North Korea. Specifically, the country's future is largely going to be determined by the preferences and abilities of its leadership. But to the extent that the outside world can influence outcomes in North Korea, South Korea is key. Seoul has a new government, which is adopting a more forward-leaning engagement policy relative to its predecessors. Whether it will look more like the inducement policy of Roh Moo-hyun or the transformative policy of Kim Dae-jung remains to be seen. Beijing will not take a harder line than Seoul, and coordination failure could create a highly dangerous situation. Just when the United States and China may be acting in concert to strengthen sanctions, a non-conditional North-South engagement policy could effectively throw North Korea a lifeline and could allow Pyongyang to resolve the contradiction embodied in the Bungjin Line. The enablement of North Korea's nuclear and missile programs could bring the country closer to eventual military conflict with the United States, which would be horrific for both the northern and southern halves of the peninsula. Yet the likelihood of peaceful resolution of the North Korea problem could be rising as well. When confronted with the paucity of good military options on the Korean Peninsula, U.S. policymakers will be forced to re-examine options for resolving the issue diplomatically.